Picture your grocery cart this week as you prep for, this long 4th of July weekend.
Yeah.
Because today is Thursday, July 2nd, 2026, and you are probably actively skipping the premium chips, ignoring those expensive brand name cereals, hunting for bargains in the produce aisle, all so you can justify spending almost $13 a pound on a steak.
And do not worry, it is not just you doing that. That $13 steak is actually the perfect entry point into how strange the current economy is. We are dealing with a multi-year agricultural crisis where years of severe drought across the U.S. and incredibly high feed costs basically forced ranchers to liquidate their herds.
Which means the U.S. cattle herd shrank to its smallest size in decades, right?
Right, and when that reduced supply meets really stubborn holiday demand, ground beef sits at $6.75 a pound, and that centerpiece steak hits absolute record highs.
Consumers are demonstrating this intense, rigid discipline in 90% of their budget, only to completely abandon it at the butcher counter. People want that USDA prime label for the holiday cookout, no matter what the receipt says, because it operates as a sort of bizarre psychological shock absorber. But while we are all distracted by the price of beef, there are massive tectonic shifts rewiring how things actually function behind the scenes.
We're seeing an economy of forced recalibrations right now, and the best way to trace that is to look at the journey from your grocery checkout to the gas station. Because shifting geopolitics just rapidly altered global transportation costs.
I mean, the physical movement of global energy is shifting dramatically. Following the framework deal signed in June between the United States and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz is finally clearing out.
To understand the sheer scale of what was trapped there during the conflict, official shipping data shows Saudi Arabia alone has shipped 34 million barrels of oil just since June 17th.
So there was effectively a massive physical traffic jam of ocean freighters just sitting there waiting for clearance.
A 17 million barrel backlog of tankers entirely trapped in the Gulf. When a mechanical bottleneck of that size unblocks, the physical reality of global shipping translates immediately to relief at local pumps. The global benchmark for wholesale oil, Brent crude, had spiked to over $120 a barrel during the height of the conflict, but it has now plummeted back down to around $72.
Motorists in the UK are feeling that impact faster than almost anyone else. They just experienced the fastest monthly fall in diesel prices since the year 2000. Prices dropped by 17 pence a liter, which puts it at roughly 167 pence, or about $2.24 a liter.
And a new government scheme over there called Fuel Finder is actively accelerating that relief. It is a digital system that lets drivers compare real-time prices directly on their phones.
Which fundamentally forces local retailers to pass those wholesale savings on to the consumer immediately, rather than, padding their profit margins for a few extra weeks while consumers are kept in the dark.
Which highlights this really fascinating tension in the global economy right now. Because while global energy trade is unblocking and flowing freely, North American trade policy is intentionally tightening its borders and restricting long-term flow.
The U.S. government just opted to block the automatic 16-year renewal of the USMCA. That is the massive trade pact binding the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Instead of locking in a decade and a half of certainty, we are now in a 10-year countdown with mandatory annual reviews.
The strategic approach here prioritizes continuous leverage over corporate comfort. By forcing annual reviews, U.S. negotiators retain a perpetual threat of tariffs to manage ongoing, really granular disputes over things like auto manufacturing rules of origin, meaning what percentage of a car's parts must be made in North America and Canadian dairy market access.
But how does a business make a long-term capital investment under those conditions? If you were planning a $2 billion auto plant in Mexico, a 16-year horizon of stability is necessary. Replacing that with year-to-year political maneuvering seems completely counterintuitive to everything we know about corporate planning.
The current administration clearly believes that holding a permanent tariff threat fundamentally alters North America's economic ties in their favor. They view a comfortable, permanent baseline as unnecessary or even disadvantageous to domestic labor.
It feels like an incredibly dangerous game of brinkmanship, essentially freezing long-term corporate planning by weaponizing uncertainty. And what is terrifying is that this concept of freezing plans is not limited to multinational corporations. Everyday consumers fall into a similar devastating trap when political bodies make financial promises they ultimately cannot keep.
Which brings us to the behavioral economics of phantom money.
Right, mental accounting. But before we look at how that is currently wrecking personal budgets with student loans, just a quick note that you can find financial candy, brain candy, and classic audiobooks at clarinericho.com. So behavioral economists use this term, mental accounting, to describe the psychological trap of spending money in your head before it actually clears the bank, right?
Yes, it happens when consumers alter their long-term budgets based on an expected financial windfall that has not materialized. A brand new major economic bureau study lays out the very real financial damage caused by the blocked Biden student loan forgiveness plan.
Because borrowers who genuinely believed they were getting relief fundamentally altered their real-world spending habits. They spent an average of $100 less per month paying down their actual loans during the delay.
The mechanics of that miscalculation are severe when you look at the compounding math. Optimistic borrowers frequently switch their repayment structures, moving from a standard 10-year term to a 20-year repayment plan, hoping to minimize their incremental out-of-pocket payments until the expected federal forgiveness cleared their balance.
That specific choice to pay less principal in the short term led to compounding interest losses of up to 6.88% of the loan's total original value. They essentially dug a deeper hole, assuming a ladder was being lowered down to them.
And they also delayed buying durable goods. If you thought $10,000 or $20,000 of debt was about to be wiped from your credit profile, you assumed you would get a much better interest rate on a mortgage later. So millions of people paused their life plans.
But during that delay, the average price of a U.S. house jumped 34%, moving from $383,000 up to $514,000. Now, with the SVE plan officially ending yesterday on July 1st, those same borrowers face significantly higher monthly loan payments than they originally budgeted for, while simultaneously facing massively inflated housing costs. Is this just a consumer failure or a massive failure of the political system making promises it couldn't honor?
It is a systemic failure of signaling. And a parallel situation of phantom money is currently unfolding across the Atlantic in the UK car finance market. Millions of drivers were expecting compensation payouts averaging roughly £829, or a little over $1,100 for missold car loans.
Because the financial regulator had banned deals where car dealers received hidden commissions based on the interest rate they charged the customer. Walk us through how those hidden commissions actually functioned on the showroom floor.
It was a practice known as discretionary commission arrangements. Essentially, the lender allowed the car dealer to adjust the interest rate on the customer's loan. If the dealer convinced the customer to accept a higher interest rate, the lender paid the dealer a larger kickback.
It was a hidden tax on the consumer, financially incentivizing the dealer to make the loan as expensive as humanly possible without the buyer knowing.
When the regulator announced they were cracking down on that, consumers rationally budgeted for an $1,100 windfall this year. But because of legal challenges launched by major lenders like Volkswagen Financial Services and Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, those payouts are completely stalled until at least 2027.
Millions of consumers realize their mental bank accounts are overdrawn. Everyday people are forced to recalibrate their budgets after relying on official headlines. When that expected capital is removed, it creates cascading failures in personal finance. And we are actually starting to see the bizarre effects of those cascading failures show up in the labor market.
The expectations for the workforce completely missed the mark in the June 2026 labor report. The labor force participation rate just dropped to 61.5%. If we exclude the extreme artificial anomalies of the pandemic era, that is the lowest participation rate in exactly 50 years.
The hospitality sector data in this report is what is completely baffling to me. The U.S., Canada, and Mexico are jointly hosting the World Cup right now. Analysts projected a massive hiring boom in bars, hotels, and restaurants to handle the international tourism. I mean, major banks explicitly expected the tournament to boost employment by 40,000 jobs.
But the actual figures showed hospitality jobs falling by 61,000 in June. The expected service sector boom completely reversed. What the data reveals is that the genuine hiring and capital expenditure boom is happening entirely out of sight. It is concentrated in the heavy, physical plumbing of artificial intelligence.
It feels like we are watching the AI gold rush graduate to a completely new phase. 2 years ago, it was all about buying the compute chips, the pickaxes. Now, companies are building the heavy-duty railroads to transport the power and sending in literal mining consultants to show other businesses where to dig.
The scale of the infrastructure required is staggering. Take GE Vernova. Their electrification division has quietly amassed a $42 billion backlog because the structural limits of the current power grid are breaking under immense demand. Tech companies are currently constructing massive data centers that demand 1 gigawatt of power each.
To put the physics of that into perspective, a single 1 gigawatt facility consumes enough electricity to power roughly 750,000 to 1 million homes. Older grid models simply disintegrate under that concentrated localized load.
Which makes GE Vernova's electrical transformers the most critical bottleneck in the tech industry today. Those transformers are the only way to physically connect these massive AI facilities to the broader electrical grid, stepping the voltage up or down to transport electricity from where it is generated to where it is consumed.
We are hearing that lead times for these transformers can stretch for years. But the implementation bottleneck is equally severe on the software side, which is forcing incredibly creative business structures from the biggest players. Microsoft is currently investing $2.5 billion to embed 6,000 forward-deployed engineers directly into client businesses.
They're not just selling a software license and walking away. They are physically sending teams into client offices to look at existing business processes and operations, essentially acting as embedded consultants to figure out how to actually use these complex AI models effectively.
And NVIDIA is getting so aggressive with their market positioning that they are bypassing traditional cash sales entirely. They are offering fast-growing startup customers the chance to swap computing power for a share of their future revenue.
By trading token credits for a slice of product and cloud revenue, NVIDIA positions itself as an intermediary controlling direct access to scarce, full-stack computing power. Access to their specific hardware has become a new global currency, circumventing standard liquidity issues in the tech sector.
They realize their chips are so valuable they do not even need your cash. They are telling startups, we will give you the computing power you desperately need, but you are giving us equity. They have essentially become the central bank of Silicon Valley. And the financial windfall from this infrastructure build-out is creating unprecedented concentrations of wealth.
Which introduces entirely new mechanisms for asset protection and wealth management. A recent massive Swiss bank report shows the 2025 stock market minted nearly 1 million new millionaires, primarily driven by an 18% rise in the U.S. stock market.
While the top end accelerates at a staggering pace, the median U.S. wealth per adult actually dropped nearly 20% between 2020 and 2025. The data clearly shows that wealth creation is increasingly linked to exposure to financial markets and business ownership, leaving traditional wage earners completely behind.
Policy responses to that widening wealth gap are taking shape this week. The new 530A accounts, heavily branded in the media as Trump accounts, officially launch on July 4, 2026. The U.S. Treasury provides a $1,000 initial deposit for kids born between 2025 and 2028.
The mechanism designed to amplify this federal seed money is corporate matching. Major employers, including Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and JP Morgan Chase, are stepping in to match that federal $1,000 contribution for their own employees' children.
The explicit goal is to encourage early, tax-deferred wealth building that can compound over decades.
Look at who is actually matching these new accounts, though. If the companies offering the matching funds are elite financial institutions and tech giants, are we not just subsidizing the children of investment bankers who are already making massive salaries? How does a matching program at Morgan Stanley bridge the median wealth gap for a factory worker?
The corporate matching element certainly favors established white-collar workforces. However, the program incorporates geographical philanthropy to offset some of that imbalance. A $6.25 billion pledge from tech billionaire Michael Dell provides an extra $250 for children living in ZIP codes where the median income is $150,000 or less.
That mechanism extends the seed capital beyond corporate borders and attempts to ground the benefit in lower-income communities. But alongside wealth creation, we are seeing urgent legislative action on wealth protection. Congress just passed the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act.
Mutual funds and transfer agents now have the explicit legal authority to pause redemption requests for up to 15 days for older adults if they suspect financial fraud. The sheer scale of the problem necessitates this kind of aggressive intervention.
Official federal trade data reported that scams targeting older adults drained an estimated $16 billion in 2025 alone, driven largely by massive, sophisticated investment and cryptocurrency scams.
The mechanics of these scams always involve creating a false sense of urgency. The scammer's entire goal is getting the victim to wire money immediately or to lie to their bank teller before they have time to think critically about the transaction.
By allowing financial institutions to hit the pause button for 15 days, they fundamentally disrupt that artificial urgency. It buys the crucial time needed to contact family members or authorities before the money vanishes permanently into an offshore crypto wallet.
That concept of long-standing systems failing under modern pressures extends far beyond financial fraud. Entire corporate strategies and physical infrastructures are buckling because they rely on outdated legacy assumptions.
The apparel industry provides a perfect example of this strategic recalibration. Brands traditionally associated with menswear are belatedly waking up to a massive demographic reality. Giants like Levi's, VF Corp, which owns the North Face in Colombia, are finally treating women's apparel as a primary growth engine.
The market arithmetic makes ignoring this segment a catastrophic failure of management. The U.S. women's apparel market is roughly 70% larger than the men's apparel market. By treating female consumers as a strategic priority rather than a secondary afterthought segment, these companies are unlocking massive addressable revenues without having to reinvent their core brand identities.
Levi's reported their women's apparel segment grew 13% in the first quarter of 2026, vastly outpacing their men's division. They shifted from just selling rigid denim to aggressively marketing lifestyle apparel, skirts, and dresses. The North Face is doing the exact same thing, projecting that women's products could account for $2 billion of their future growth.
Ignoring half the population is an incredibly expensive strategic error. But relying on legacy assumptions and physical engineering is causing even more immediate, tangible damage. During the current record-breaking heat wave in the UK, supermarket refrigeration systems and domestic home fridges are completely failing.
Think about how a refrigerator actually works. It does not magically create cold air. It just moves heat from the inside of the box to the outside room. But these UK supermarket fridges were engineered decades ago for a climate where the ambient temperature rarely exceeded 32 degrees Celsius, or about 89 degrees Fahrenheit.
When the ambient air inside a building pushes past that specific design threshold, the compressors must work continually in a desperate attempt to expel heat. Because the external air is too hot to absorb the expelled thermal energy, the mechanical systems eventually burn themselves out completely, forcing stores to discard massive amounts of perishable inventory.
Replacing all of those units overnight is financially impossible for supermarkets. The equipment has a standard 20-year life cycle, so businesses are paying steep financial costs today for relying on legacy climate assumptions built in the 1990s.
Which brings us to the core pattern driving today's market. We are watching a profound economy-wide recalibration against outdated expectations. Consumers are forced to recalibrate their budgets after political promises regarding student loans evaporated. The physical power grid is desperately recalibrating to handle the massive energy demands of AI.
And legacy retail companies are frantically recalibrating their target demographics and their physical machinery just to survive. Which leaves us with a vital question to consider as you head into the holiday weekend. If our physical infrastructure, like those 89-degree refrigerators, and our geopolitical infrastructure, like those 16-year trade pacts, are fracturing because they were built for the realities of 20 years ago, what other invisible systems operating our daily lives are secretly maxed out right now? Think about that as you fire up the grill and protect that steak at all costs. Thanks for joining us for this analysis.